Buster's happy home. The afternoon sun, warm and buttery, painted stripes across the emerald expanse of the Miller family's backyard. Buster, a golden retriever whose fur shone like polished honey, skittered across the lawn, his tail a frantic metronome. A well-loved, slightly slobbery tennis ball bounced ahead of him, a vibrant yellow blur against the green. He launched himself, a graceful arc of muscle and fur, snatching the ball mid-air with a satisfying thwack. A triumphant shake of his head, and he was trotting back, his amber eyes sparkling with delight, the ball held carefully between his jaws. "Good boy, Buster, good boy!" Mr. Miller's voice, deep and resonant, boomed from the porch swing. Buster, ever eager to please, dropped the ball at his master's feet, nudging it with his wet nose, an unspoken invitation for another round. Mrs. Miller, engrossed in a gardening magazine, smiled over the top of her spectacles, a soft, affectionate sound escaping her lips. But Buster's true joy, the brightest star in his already radiant world, was Lily. 8 years old, with hair the colour of corn silk and eyes that mirrored the summer sky, Lily was Buster's human. She emerged from the back door, a smudge of dirt on her cheek from a recent encounter with a particularly stubborn dandelion, and Buster's tail went into overdrive, thumping a rapid rhythm against the flagstones. He abandoned the tennis ball, forgot the thrill of the chase, and instead offered a series of happy, breathless barks. Lily giggled, a sound like wind chimes, and knelt, opening her arms wide. Buster, with an enthusiasm that belied his considerable size, practically threw himself into her embrace. He pressed his head against her shoulder, his soft fur tickling her ear, and emitted a low, rumbling groan of contentment. Lily's small hands found their way to his belly, and she began to rub, slow and deliberate, just the way he liked it. Buster's hind leg twitched uncontrollably, a drumstick keeping time with her ministrations. This was his happy place. The warm sun, the familiar scent of cut grass, and Lily's gentle touch. In these moments, the world outside the Millers' tidy fence faded into insignificance. Later, as twilight began to bleed purple into the sky, the Miller family gathered in the living room. The scent of Mrs. Miller's homemade lasagna still lingered, a comforting aroma. Buster, sprawled on the worn rug in front of the flickering fireplace, was a picture of canine contentment. His heavy eyelids drooped, but one ear occasionally twitched, catching snippets of conversation. Mr. Miller read aloud from a dog-eared adventure book, his voice a soothing drone. Lily, curled on the sofa beside her mother, was sketching furiously in a notebook, her tongue peeking out from the corner of her mouth in concentration. And the brave knight, with his faithful steed, finally reached the dragon's lair, missed at the sleeping dog. He'd fight off all at the sleeping dog. He'd fight off all the dragons. Mrs. Miller chuckled, reaching out to gently stroke Buster's golden fur. "He certainly would, honey. He's the bravest dog I know." Buster, as if summoned by their words, let out a soft snuffle, his tail giving a lazy thud against the rug. He was a sentinel of their peace, a furry shadow always nearby, content simply to be part of their world. This was Buster's happy home, a haven of warmth, laughter, and unconditional love. He had everything a dog could ever want: a soft bed, endless belly rubs, and a family who adored him. He knew every creak of the floorboards, every whispered secret, every shared smile within these walls. But as the days bled into weeks, a subtle shift began to ripple through Buster's serene existence. It started subtly. A twitch of his nose, a prolonged sniff at a particular patch of earth near the back fence. Then, the digging began. Not the playful, shallow scratches of a dog looking for a lost toy, but something deeper, more focused. He'd spend hours at it, his powerful paws scooping earth with an almost frantic energy. Lily was the first to notice the change in his routine. "Mum, Buster's digging again," she'd say, her brow furrowed with concern. "He never used to dig so much." Mrs. Miller would usually offer a dismissive wave. "Oh, he's probably just after a mole, honey, or burying a bone." But Buster wasn't burying bones. He wasn't after moles. He was after something else entirely, something only he seemed to perceive. The patch of earth grew larger, a raw brown scar against the manicured lawn. His usual boundless energy, once directed at chasing balls, was now channeled into this obsessive excavation. He'd emerge from his labours covered in dirt, his usually pristine fur matted and muddy, but with an intensity in his eyes that was unsettling. One afternoon, Lily watched him from her bedroom window. The sun was setting, painting the sky in fiery hues. But Buster paid no attention. He was digging, his head almost entirely submerged in the ever-deepening hole. He whined, a low, guttural sound, as if in distress. Then he stopped, his ears perked, his whole body stiff with alertness. He let out a sharp, urgent bark, a sound Lily had never heard from him before. It wasn't a playful bark, or a warning bark. It was a bark of pure desperation. He barked again, then again, his head swivelling towards the house, his amber eyes pleading. Lily's heart gave a little lurch. This wasn't Buster being Buster. This was something different. Something was wrong. She scrambled off her bed, her earlier timidity forgotten, and raced downstairs. "Mum! Dad! Something's wrong with Buster!" she cried, her voice laced with genuine fear. "He's barking like I've never heard him bark before, and he won't stop digging." Mr. Miller, who had been engrossed in a particularly complex crossword puzzle, looked up, a frown creasing his forehead. Mrs. Miller, who had been watering her prize-winning petunias, dropped her watering can with a clatter. They exchanged a quick glance, a flicker of concern passing between them. Buster's barks, now insistent and unwavering, echoed through the quiet house, a clear call for help that could no longer be ignored. This wasn't a mole. This wasn't a bone. This was something important, something urgent, and Buster, in his own wordless way, was trying to tell them. The strange digging begins. The crisp autumn air, usually a welcome caress, now carried an unfamiliar tension. Buster, a creature of boundless energy and unyielding affection, found his focus irrevocably drawn to the ancient oak at the far corner of the yard. Its gnarled roots, thick as a man's thigh, snaked across the lawn, creating miniature hills and valleys in the otherwise manicured grass. He usually regarded these roots with playful indifference, perhaps a quick sniff before chasing a squirrel or a rogue tennis ball. Today, however, was different. His golden nose, always wet and discerning, quivered with an intensity Lily had never witnessed. It dipped low, brushing the earth just where a particularly prominent root plunged back into the soil. A low, continuous snuffle escaped him, a sound unlike his usual contented huffs or excited yaps. He paced a tight circle around the spot, his tail, typically a blur of happiness, now held low, a slow, deliberate pendulum. His ears, usually perked, twitched with an almost frantic energy, straining to catch some imperceptible vibration or distant sound. Lily, 8 years old and Buster's inseparable shadow, watched from the porch swing, a half-eaten apple forgotten in her hand. Her brow furrowed, a mirror to Buster's unusual demeanour. He wasn't playing. He wasn't waiting for a treat. He was searching. His snuffling grew more insistent, punctuated by small, sharp exhales, as if trying to clear his senses. Suddenly, with an abruptness that startled Lily, Buster dropped to his haunches. His powerful front paws, usually reserved for enthusiastic greetings or digging up buried toys, began to move. Not with the playful abandon of a dog unearthing a bone, but with a surprising ferocity. Clumps of rich, dark earth flew backward, landing with soft thuds against the oak's rough bark. His movements were swift, efficient, driven by an unseen imperative. He didn't look up, didn't acknowledge Lily's presence. His entire being was consumed by the task at hand. Lily, captivated by the unusual spectacle, slid off the swing, her small, bare feet padding softly across the cool grass. She stopped a safe distance away, not wanting to disturb him, yet drawn in by the strange urgency of his actions. Buster whined softly, a low, guttural sound that vibrated with a raw edge of frustration. He dug deeper, his nails scraping against something hard beneath the soil. Just then, Mr. Miller emerged from the house, a watering can in hand, ready to tend to his prize-winning petunias. He paused, his gaze falling upon the flurry of activity near the oak tree. His brow furrowed. "Buster, what in the world are you doing?" he called out, his voice carrying a note of parental disapproval. Buster, uncharacteristically, ignored him. He continued his frantic excavation, his golden fur already dusted with fine soil. His head was now almost entirely buried in the ever-deepening hole. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound so unlike his usual jovial barks that Mr. Miller took a step back, a flicker of concern replacing his initial annoyance. "Buster, stop that right now!" Mr. Miller commanded, his voice firmer this time. He took a few purposeful strides towards the digging dog. He imagined the roots he'd meticulously protected, now potentially exposed and damaged. This was prime digging season for squirrels, but Buster had never shown such destructive tendencies. He pictured the muddy paws that would inevitably track across his freshly mopped kitchen floor. "Come on, boy, leave it!" He reached the edge of the expanding crater, observing the surprisingly deep hole Buster had already created in a matter of minutes. The dog's rear end, dusted with soil, wriggled furiously. Mr. Miller bent down, about to grab Buster's collar, when a particularly sharp, distressed whine tore from the dog's throat. It wasn't the excited whine of a dog discovering a hidden treasure, but something closer to a plea, a desperate communication of distress. He hesitated, his hand hovering. Buster paused his digging for a split second, lifting his head, his dark eyes meeting Mr. Miller's. They weren't playful, or naughty, or even guilty. They were wide, intense, and brimming with an inexplicable urgency that sent a shiver down Mr. Miller's spine. It was a look that pleaded for understanding, a silent scream that something was terribly, terribly wrong. A daily obsession. The next morning, Buster was at it again, a furry dervish of determination at the base of the ancient oak. The dew-kissed grass was already disturbed, a fresh mound of rich, dark earth, testament to his early start. Lily watched him from her bedroom window, a knot of worry tightening in her stomach. His usual morning ritual involved a boisterous greeting at the back door, followed by a playful chase of squirrels across the lawn. Today the squirrels chattered unmolested, their bushy tails twitching in the dappled sunlight. Buster was oblivious, his powerful hind legs kicking dirt skyward with relentless rhythm. "Buster, breakfast!" Lily called from the back porch, a bowl of kibble in one hand, his favourite squeaky toy in the other. He usually came tearing across the yard at the mere mention of food, his tail a blur of excitement. But today, only the rhythmic thud of his paws against the soil answered her. He didn't even pause, his snout still buried deep in the earth, a low, guttural whine rumbling in his chest. Mrs. Miller, drawn by the unusual quiet of Buster's absence at the breakfast table, stepped onto the porch. "What's gotten into that dog?" she murmured, her brow furrowed with concern. She tried a different tactic, shaking a bag of his favourite liver treats. The crinkle of the plastic usually brought him running, a drooling, hopeful expression on his face. Not today. Buster continued his excavation, his ears flattened against his head, a posture Lily recognised as one of intense focus, bordering on desperation. Throughout the day, the scene repeated itself. Attempts to lure Buster away with walks, games of fetch, or even gentle coaxing proved futile. He'd momentarily lift his head, a fleck of dirt on his nose, his eyes wide and pleading, before resuming his frantic digging. The hole grew steadily, a dark, gaping wound in the otherwise pristine lawn. Lily spent the afternoon watching him, her homework forgotten, a quiet dread settling over her. When Mr. Miller arrived home from work, the sight of Buster, still at it, caked in mud and panting heavily, immediately caught his attention. "What in the world?" he exclaimed, dropping his briefcase. He walked over, kneeling beside the tireless dog. "Buster, old boy, what are you doing?" He tried to gently pull him away, but Buster resisted, a low growl rumbling in his throat, a sound Lily had never heard from him before. It wasn't aggressive, more a sound of deep-seated distress, a plea for understanding. That evening, the air at the dinner table was thick with unspoken questions. Mrs. Miller pushed her peas around her plate. "He hasn't eaten a bite all day," she said, her voice laced with worry. "I even tried to hand-feed him."
"It's like he's possessed," Mr. Miller added, spearing a potato with more force than necessary. "He wouldn't even let me touch him near that tree."
Lily, usually a chatterbox, was unusually quiet. She picked at her chicken, her mind replaying Buster's desperate barks from the day before, the urgency in his eyes. "He looked scared," she finally offered, her voice small. "And really, really determined, like he had to get to something." "Maybe he found a squirrel nest," Mrs. Miller suggested, though her tone lacked conviction. Mr. Miller scoffed gently. "Buster's found plenty of squirrel nests in his time. He's never dug like this. This is different. He's usually so playful, so easily distracted. Now it's like nothing else exists for him." A shiver ran down Lily's spine. She remembered the sheer intensity in Buster's eyes, the way his muscles bunched and strained with every frantic dig. It wasn't about a squirrel or a buried bone. It was something far more profound, a hidden distress signal that only Buster seemed to hear. The thought gnawed at her, pulling at the edges of her imagination. What could be so important, so urgent, that it consumed Buster entirely, eclipsing his basic needs, overriding his ingrained obedience? The image of his pleading eyes, flecked with dirt, stayed with her long after dinner, a silent testament to a mystery unfolding in their own backyard.
Lily's worry. The late afternoon sun, usually a comforting blanket, now seemed to cast long, unsettling shadows across their backyard. Lily watched Buster, his usually wagging tail limp, his body a picture of desperate focus. She knelt beside him, a brightly coloured squeaky toy in her hand.
"Buster, want to play fetch?" she asked, her voice soft, trying to inject some of her usual playful enthusiasm into the words. She squeezed the toy, and it let out a comical, high-pitched squeal. Buster paused, his snout still buried deep in the fresh earth. He lifted his head slowly, his usually bright eyes clouded with a profound sadness that startled Lily. He didn't bark, didn't even offer a customary sniff of the toy. Instead, a low, mournful whine escaped his throat, a sound that pulled at Lily's heartstrings. It was a sound she'd never heard from him before, not even when he'd been to the vet for his annual shots. He then returned his attention to the oak's base, his paws moving with renewed, almost frantic energy. Lily watched, a knot tightening in her stomach. Buster wasn't just digging, he was searching. Each scoop of dirt seemed fueled by an invisible urgency, a silent plea that only he could hear. His panting was shallow, his flanks heaving with effort, yet he showed no sign of stopping. His usually sleek fur was matted with soil, and a streak of mud ran across his nose, but he was oblivious to it all. He was utterly consumed, and it was heartbreaking to witness. Later, as the light began to fade, casting the yard in hues of purple and orange, Buster was still at it. Lily sat on the back porch swing, her knees drawn up to her chest, watching him. The cheerful chirping of crickets usually filled the twilight air, but tonight, all she could hear was the rhythmic scrape of Buster's claws against the earth, and the occasional soft thud of displaced soil. His head was bowed, his entire posture radiating a deep, pervasive sorrow. He looked utterly dejected, as if carrying the weight of the world on his furry shoulders. He wasn't just tired, he was profoundly unhappy. "He's not himself, Mum," Lily said later that evening, picking at her dinner. The roasted chicken, usually her favourite, tasted like cardboard. Her mother, Sarah, sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I know, sweetie. Your dad and I tried to get him to come in for dinner, but he just wouldn't budge." She glanced at the back door, where Buster's silhouette could still be seen through the glass, a persistent shadow against the fading light. "It's more than just being stubborn," Lily insisted, pushing her plate away. "He looks sad, really, really sad, and worried, like he's trying to tell us something important, but we can't understand him." Her voice trembled slightly, a testament to the depth of her concern. "What if he's sick? Or what if something is wrong and he's trying to fix it?" Her father, Tom, pushed his glasses up his nose, a thoughtful frown creasing his brow. "He does seem unusually distressed. I've never seen him so fixated on anything, not even a squirrel up a tree." He took a sip of his water. "We checked the area, Lilybug. There's nothing obvious there. No strange smells that we can detect, no exposed wires, no signs of anything dangerous." "But he still keeps digging," Lily counted, her brow furrowed with a worry that felt too big for her small frame. He wouldn't be this upset for no reason. He loves his food, and he hasn't touched it all day. He usually goes crazy for his chew toys, and he ignored them. It's like, whatever he's looking for, it's more important than anything else. She pictured Buster's forlorn expression, the almost frantic intensity in his eyes. I just have a bad feeling, Mum. A really bad feeling. The familiar comfort of their home felt subtly shifted, a faint unease settling over them like a fine dust. Buster's silent, desperate plea echoed in the quiet of the dining room, a mystery waiting to be unearthed. The desperate bark. The late afternoon sun, usually a warm balm, now seemed to cast long, unsettling shadows across the miller's backyard. Buster, however, was oblivious to the cooling air or the shifting light. His snout, once a velvety black, was now caked with dark earth, and his usually gleaming fur was matted with damp soil. He dug with a frenzied intensity that was alarming to behold. His powerful paws moved in a blur, sending sprays of dirt flying, each scrape and clawful of earth a testament to his singular, desperate purpose. The hole around the oak tree, already significant, deepened with startling speed. Roots, thick as an adult's arm, were no match for his determined gnawing and tearing. A low, guttural whine rumbled from his chest, a sound of profound distress that seemed to vibrate through the very ground. Lily watched from the kitchen window, her small face pressed against the cool glass. Her brow was furrowed with worry, a familiar knot tightening in her stomach. Buster's usual exuberant barks and playful tail wags felt like a distant memory. This Buster was a creature consumed by an unseen burden, his usual golden warmth replaced by a stark, almost frantic energy. Her parents had tried to coax him away with his favourite squeaky toys and juicy treats, but he'd ignored them, his gaze fixed on the earth, his body a coiled spring of determination. He was a canine possessed, driven by an instinct far beyond human comprehension. Suddenly, with a final, violent heave of his front paws, Buster stopped. His body froze, muscles taut, every fibre of his being focused on the dark cavity he had created. Then, without warning, a sound ripped from his throat, a sound that was not a scream, but a cry of pain. The frantic digging ceased, replaced by an unnerving stillness. Then, without warning, a sound ripped from his throat, a sharp, piercing bark that echoed through the quiet yard, unlike any bark Lily had ever heard from him. It wasn't a playful bark, nor an excited greeting, nor even an angry warning. This was a bark of pure, unadulterated urgency, a desperate plea that resonated deep within Lily's chest. Her parents, who had been attempting to lure Buster with a particularly tempting piece of grilled chicken, also froze. The sharp sound had cut through their casual conversation, drawing their attention instantly. Her father, Mr. Miller, exchanged a look with her mother, Mrs. Miller, a flicker of apprehension in his eyes. "What was that?" Mrs. Miller murmured, her voice laced with concern. The urgent bark came again, louder this time, more insistent. Buster, still poised over the edge of the hole, turned his head slightly towards them. His usually soft brown eyes were wide, brimming with a desperate plea that tugged at Lily's heart. He didn't move away from the hole, didn't even twitch his tail. He simply stood sentinel, his gaze fixed on his family, then back down into the dark opening, as if imploring them to understand. Lily didn't wait. She bolted from the kitchen, through the back door, and across the lawn, her small legs pumping. "Buster!" she cried, her voice thin with alarm. Her parents followed, their strides longer and more hesitant. As Lily reached the oak tree, Buster let out another bark, softer this time, but no less urgent, a whimper now interwoven with the sound. He nudged his nose towards the opening he had so tirelessly created, then looked at Lily with an expression that was almost human in its worry. The air around the hole felt heavy, charged with an unspoken tension. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through the ground, or perhaps it was just Lily's imagination, fueled by Buster's profound distress. He stood his ground, a furry, four-legged guardian refusing to leave the spot, his entire being radiating a fierce, protective energy. The desperate bark had been a summons, a cry for help, and now, with his family finally gathered, Buster held them captive with his worried gaze, silently begging them to look deeper, to understand the secret he had uncovered beneath the roots of the old oak. Mr. Miller, his brow furrowed with a mixture of annoyance and curiosity, approached the gaping maw Buster had carved into their lawn. The golden retriever, usually a whirlwind of tail wags and joyful panting, was now an unmoving statue, his golden fur matted with damp earth. His eyes, fixed on the dark opening, gleamed with an intensity Mr. Miller had never witnessed. "All this fuss about," Mr. Miller muttered, his voice a low rumble. "All right, boy. What's all this fuss about?" Mr. Miller muttered, peering over the edge. The hole was surprisingly deep, a jagged, uneven chasm that smelled of damp soil and something faintly organic. He braced his hands on his knees, leaning closer, trying to discern anything in the gloom. The afternoon sun, already beginning its descent, cast long, distorted shadows, making the depths appear even more impenetrable. "Is there a gopher, Daddy?" Lily whispered, her voice barely audible above the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. She tried to peek past her father, her small frame straining. "Probably just a particularly stubborn root, sweet pea," Mr. Miller replied, his tone attempting to convey a calm he didn't quite feel. Buster's behaviour was unsettling. He had seen the dog dig for moles before, for buried toys, even for particularly aromatic patches of earth, but never with this frantic, single-minded desperation, and never had he maintained such a rigid vigil after the digging ceased. He squatted, bringing his face closer to the rim. The air within the hole felt cooler, denser. He could just make out some loose soil, a few stray pebbles, and what looked like the end of an old rusted pipe, half buried in the side of the excavation. "Looks like an old drain pipe, Lilybug. Probably just got a bit of dirt in it." He tried to sound reassuring, but a prickle of unease ran down his spine. Buster let out a low, mournful whimper, a sound so uncharacteristic it sent a shiver through Lily. "He found something, Daddy," Lily insisted, pulling on his shirt. "He wouldn't be like this for just a pipe." Her empathy for Buster was a tangible thing, a silent communication between them that often left her parents bewildered. She knew, instinctively, that Buster's distress was real, profound. Mr. Miller sighed, pushing a stray lock of hair from his eyes. He leaned in further, his ear almost brushing the damp earth. The silence was thick, broken only by the chirping of crickets beginning their evening chorus. He listened, straining his ears for any sound, any rustle, any indication of what had driven Buster to such extremes. His gaze swept the dark interior, searching for movement, a glint of an eye, anything. Just as he was about to straighten up, a sound, so faint it was almost imperceptible, reached him. It was a tiny, reedy sound, like a wisp of smoke, barely there, clinging to the edges of his hearing. He froze, his breath catching in his throat. He thought, for a moment, it was the wind, whistling through a crack in the old pipe. But then it came again, a little clearer this time, undeniably a living sound. Mew. It was barely louder than a sigh, a fragile, desperate plea. Mr. Miller's eyes widened, his head snapping up to meet Buster's intense gaze. The dog's tail, which had been still for what felt like an eternity, gave a single, slow thump against the earth, a sound of profound relief. Lily, her hand still clasped in her father's, felt the sudden tension in his grip. She watched his face, saw the shift from dismissal to alarm, then to something akin to wonder. "What is it, Daddy?" she whispered, her own heart beginning to race. Mr. Miller didn't answer immediately. He leaned in again, his ear pressed almost directly to the opening. This time, the sound was undeniable. A tiny, desperate cry that pierced the encroaching twilight. It was a kitten, trapped. A tiny, vulnerable life hidden beneath their feet. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. Buster hadn't been digging for a root, or a mole, or a forgotten chew toy. He had been digging for this. The faint, almost imperceptible mew Mr. Miller had heard now echoed in the sudden silence of the backyard. Lily, her eyes wide with a dawning understanding, leaned closer to the edge of the hole, her small hands balled into fists. Buster, usually so boisterous and playful, remained utterly still, his nose pressed firmly against the dark opening, a low, guttural whimper vibrating deep in his chest. It wasn't a cry of pain, but something akin to profound anxiety, a sound of desperation barely contained. "Dad," Lily whispered, her voice barely audible. It's a baby sound." Mr. Miller nodded, his earlier dismissal of an old pipe now a source of sharp regret. He knelt beside his daughter, peering into the gloom. The air, heavy with the scent of damp earth and something indefinable, something small and vulnerable, prickled at their senses. "You're right, Sweet Pea," he murmured, his gaze sweeping over Buster's matted fur, his usually bright eyes clouded with an unusual intensity. Buster knew. A tentative hand stroking Buster's. A tentative hand stroking Buster's powerful flank. "What is it, boy? What did you find?" Buster shifted slightly, nudging his head against the lip of the hole, then looked back at Lily, his expression mirroring her worry. He let out another soft whimper, then a tiny, almost imperceptible lick at the air before turning his attention back to the dark void. Mrs. Miller, drawn by the unusual quietude followed by the low, insistent whines, emerged from the house, a concerned frown etched on her face. "What's going on out here? I thought I heard... Oh my goodness! What's Buster doing?" She took in the enormous hole, the excavated earth piled high, and the golden retriever's uncharacteristic stillness. "There's something down there, Sarah," Mr. Miller said, his voice taut with a new urgency.
Something small. I think.
From the hole to Buster, then to Lily's, from the hole to Buster, then to Lily's anxious face. A baby? Oh, you poor thing! She turned and hurried back towards the house. Stay put! I'll get a flashlight! The next few moments stretched out, punctuated only by Buster's soft, continuous whimpers and the faint, almost imperceptible cries from below. Lily, now fully invested in the mystery, pressed closer to her father, her small body radiating concern. She imagined what kind of tiny creature could be trapped, picturing a lost bird, a baby squirrel, or perhaps even a little rabbit. The thought of any animal, alone and scared in the dark, twisted a knot in her stomach. Mrs. Miller returned swiftly, a powerful beam of light cutting through the twilight. She knelt, carefully directing the focused circle of illumination into the gaping hole. The light pierced the blackness, revealing not just a cavern of disturbed earth, but also a dark, narrow opening. The mouth of a pipe, half buried and almost invisible without the focused beam. There! Lily gasped, pointing a trembling finger. The beam settled on a small, huddled form, wedged deep within the pipe. It was tiny, no bigger than Mr. Miller's hand, and covered in what looked like a fine layer of grey dust or mud. Two luminous, terrified eyes reflected the flashlight's glow, wide and unblinking. A tiny pink tongue flickered from a minuscule mouth as another weak mew escaped, sounding even more fragile now that they could see its source. It was a kitten. A very, very small kitten. Its fur, what little could be seen beneath the grime, appeared to be a mix of grey and white, patchy and dishevelled. Its body was curled into a tight ball, as if trying to shrink away from the overwhelming light and the presence of so many giants. It was clearly weak, shivering visibly even from their distance, its breathing shallow and rapid. Buster, who had remained riveted to the hole, let out a louder, more distressed whine, a sound of profound relief mixed with an almost desperate urgency. He pushed his nose further into the opening, as if trying to physically reach the trapped creature. Lily gasped, a hand flying to her mouth. "Oh, Mum! Dad! It's just a baby!" Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the image of the tiny, scared face. Her heart ached for the vulnerable creature, trapped and alone. The earlier frustration with Buster's digging vanished, replaced by an overwhelming sense of empathy and a fierce desire to help. This wasn't just a mysterious hole anymore. It was a desperate plight, laid bare by the unwavering instinct of their loyal dog. Buster's vigil. Buster, his paws caked with dark, moist earth, let out a frustrated growl. He pushed his snout against the unforgiving metal of the pipe, a low, desperate whine rumbling in his chest. His powerful legs churned, sending a spray of soil over the grass, but the pipe remained steadfast, a cold, unyielding barrier. He knew the kitten was in there, could practically feel its tiny, panicked heartbeat resonating through the cold steel. The scent, faint but unmistakable, was a constant torment. He whined again, a sound laden with helplessness, then nudged the edge of the pipe with his nose as if trying to dislodge it through sheer will. It was useless. The pipe was too deep, too strong, its mouth too narrow for his broad head. Lily, her brow furrowed with concern, watched him from a few feet away. Her own hands, still smudged with dirt from earlier, trembled slightly. "He's trying so hard, Dad," she whispered, her voice barely audible above Buster's frantic snuffling. Her father, Mr. Miller, knelt beside her, his expression grim. "I know, sweetie, but we need to think this through. We can't just go digging blindly now that we know what's down there." Buster, defeated for the moment, let out a mournful sigh and collapsed beside the hole. His large head rested on his outstretched paws. His eyes, usually sparkling with mischief, now held a deep, unshakable sorrow. A soft, continuous whimper escaped him, a quiet lament that spoke volumes of his distress. He occasionally licked the rim of the pipe, as if hoping to somehow impart comfort or reassurance to the unseen creature within. He didn't move, didn't even glance at the family watching him. His entire world had shrunk to this one spot, this one desperate, undeniable need to protect. Mrs. Miller, who had arrived with a blanket and a thermos of coffee, draped the soft wool over Buster's back. He barely registered it, his focus unwavering. "He won't leave, will he?" she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. She had never seen Buster like this, not even when he'd been sick, and stroked his fur, feeling the rapid thump of his heart beneath her fingers. "It's okay, Buster," she whispered, though she knew he couldn't understand her words. "We'll get it out. We promise." Buster responded with a low grumble, a sound that was less a complaint and more a confirmation of his relentless concern. He shifted slightly, nudging her hand with his nose, then returned his gaze to the dark maw of the pipe. The sun began its slow descent, painting the western sky in hues of orange and purple. A chill crept into the air, but Buster remained steadfast. He lay there, a golden statue of unwavering loyalty, his breath fogging slightly in the cooling air. The soft whines continued, a constant low thrumming of anxiety. Every now and then he'd lift his head, his ears perked, listening for any sound from within the pipe. Once, a faint, almost imperceptible mewl reached them, and Buster's entire body tensed, his tail thumping a soft, urgent rhythm against the earth. He looked up at the Millers, his eyes pleading, urging them to act, to do something, anything. Mr. Miller, seeing the raw emotion in his dog's eyes, felt a fresh surge of determination. He knew they couldn't just leave Buster there, consumed by this silent vigil. The dog's unwavering devotion was a powerful, unspoken challenge. It wasn't just about a trapped kitten anymore. It was about honouring Buster's extraordinary empathy, his profound connection to another vulnerable life. The family watched him, a silent tableau under the fading light, understanding without words the depth of their dog's commitment. Buster's vigil was a testament to a heart far larger than his impressive size, a heart that would not rest until the little creature in the darkness was safe. The stubborn pipe. Mr. Miller, his face a mask of determined concentration, braced himself. He wrapped both hands around the exposed section of the PVC pipe, his knuckles white against the smooth plastic. The air was thick with unspoken tension, Buster's low whines a constant, mournful underscore to the quiet rustling of leaves. With a grunt that vibrated through his chest, he pulled. His muscles bunched and strained, the fabric of his shirt tightening across his broad shoulders. The dirt around the pipe's base shuddered faintly, a few loose pebbles scattering, but the pipe itself remained stubbornly rooted. He tried again, shifting his stance, digging his heels into the soft earth for better leverage. This time he put his entire body weight into it, a guttural sound escaping his lips with the effort. A bead of sweat trickled down his temple, tracing a path through a stray strand of hair. The pipe didn't budge. Not an inch. It was as if it were an extension of the earth itself, an ancient, unyielding bone buried deep beneath the surface. Lily watched, her heart a frantic flutter against her ribs. Each failed attempt was a fresh pang of disappointment, a setback for the unseen creature trapped within. Her small hands were clasped tightly, her knuckles almost as white as her father's. Buster, sensing the lack of progress, let out a short, sharp bark, then nudged Mr. Miller's leg with his wet nose, as if offering encouragement, or perhaps a silent plea for more urgency.
"It's really in there," Mr. Miller finally conceded, letting go with a frustrated sigh. He wiped his brow with the back of his hand, leaving a smear of dirt on his forehead. "Feels like it's cemented down." Mrs. Miller knelt beside him, her brow furrowed with concern.
"Could it be part of an old drainage system? That would explain why it's so deep."
"Possibly," he agreed, examining the pipe with a critical eye. "It doesn't look like modern plumbing, more like something left over from a very old structure." He tapped the plastic with his knuckles. The sound was hollow, but the pipe itself felt incredibly solid. "We can't just yank it. If it's connected to something else, we could damage it further, or worse, hurt the kitten inside." Lily's breath caught in her throat at the thought.
"We have to be careful, Daddy,"
she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her eyes flicked to Buster, who was now lying down beside the pipe, his nose pressed against it, a soft whimper escaping him. His distress was a raw, palpable thing, mirroring her own anxieties. "She's right," Mrs. Miller said, placing a comforting hand on Lily's shoulder. "We need a plan that's safe for the kitten. We can't risk any sudden movements."
Mr. Miller nodded, his gaze sweeping across the disturbed earth and the resolute pipe. "We need to expose more of the pipe, see how deep it goes and what it's connected to. But that means more digging, and we're right next to the roots of the old oak." He gestured to the gnarled, ancient roots that snaked across the ground, some as thick as his arm. "I don't want to damage the tree either." The dilemma hung in the air, a new layer of complexity added to their urgent task. How do you free a fragile creature from a pipe that refused to yield without damaging the pipe itself or the venerable tree that guarded it? Lily looked from her father's determined but thoughtful expression to her mother's worried frown, and then to Buster, whose mournful eyes seemed to hold all the sorrow in the world. The silence was broken only by the chirping of distant birds and the soft, insistent puffs of Buster's breath against the unyielding plastic. The pipe, dull white against the dark earth, seemed to mock their efforts, a stubborn, unmoving obstacle to hope. "All right, team." Mr. Miller's voice, usually so jovial, was now a low hum of focused determination. He surveyed the makeshift rescue site, the oak's gnarled roots forming a natural amphitheatre around the exposed pipe. "We need some different tools, something smaller, gentler." Lily, her heart still thrumming with the fear of the kitten's plight, watched Buster. He sat beside the pipe, his large head resting on his paws, nose twitching almost imperceptibly, as if listening for the faintest whisper from within the plastic cylinder. A soft, worried whine escaped him occasionally, a sound that twisted a knot in Lily's stomach. Mrs. Miller, ever practical, had already sprung into action. "I'll get the gardening trowels and some buckets," she announced, disappearing around the corner of the house. Lily, feeling the need to contribute, though unsure how, followed her mother. In the shed, the familiar scent of potting soil and damp wood offered a fleeting comfort. Mrs. Miller rummaged through a chaotic shelf, emerging with 2 small, sturdy trowels, one metal, one plastic, and a pair of gardening gloves. "These should do," she said, handing the plastic one to Lily. "Gentle stroke, sweetheart. We don't want to jostle anything." Back at the oak, the late afternoon sun cast long, distorted shadows, making the pipe's dark opening seem even more ominous. Mr. Miller, his brow furrowed in concentration, accepted the metal trowel. He knelt beside the pipe, his large frame carefully positioned to avoid putting any pressure on the ground directly around it. Buster nudged his arm with his wet nose, a low rumble emanating from his chest, a poignant plea for speed and care. "I know, boy, I know," Mr. Miller murmured, his voice thick with empathy. "We're trying. We're going to get him out." He began to work, his movements slow and deliberate. The tip of the trowel scraped against the packed earth, dislodging small clods of soil. Each tiny heap of dirt that fell away felt like an eternity passing. Lily watched, mesmerized by the meticulous precision of her father's hands. He wasn't digging with force, but rather coaxing the earth to yield, chipping away at the hard-packed soil surrounding the pipe. Lily, with her plastic trowel, began to clear the loosened dirt. It was a painstaking process. She scooped up the small piles of earth, her movements mirroring her father's carefulness. Mrs. Miller joined them, using her hands to gently brush away the finer particles, creating a small, clear perimeter around the pipe's base. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and the unspoken tension of their shared mission. A bead of sweat trickled down Mr. Miller's temple, reflecting the intense focus he brought to the task. He occasionally paused, leaning in close to the pipe, listening intently. Lily held her breath with him, straining her own ears, hoping to hear a faint cry, a tiny indication that the kitten was still fighting. But there was only the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze and the distant chirping of crickets. Buster, his eyes fixed on the pipe, occasionally let out a soft whimper, his tail giving a tiny, almost imperceptible twitch. It was a silent conversation between him and the unseen creature, a promise of deliverance. Lily reached out and stroked his golden fur, finding a small measure of comfort in the steady beat of his heart against her palm. "Just a little more," Mr. Miller whispered, as another small section of earth crumbled away, revealing more of the buried PVC. The pipe seemed to stretch deeper than they had initially imagined, a cold, unyielding tunnel into the earth. The challenge wasn't just removing the dirt, but doing so without dislodging the pipe itself, which might send the kitten further down or even collapse the fragile earth around it. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The golden light bathed the scene, casting their figures in long dancing shadows. Time seemed to stretch and contract, each minute an hour, each hour a fleeting moment. The rhythmic scrape of the trowel, the gentle rustle of falling dirt, and the quiet murmurs of encouragement formed a hushed symphony of rescue. They were a unified force, driven by a shared, urgent compassion, each family member contributing to the slow, careful unfolding of hope. The kitten's fate, they knew, rested in their collective hands and in the persistent, unwavering faith of a very good dog. Freedom! A collective breath hitched as the earth around the pipe, softened by hours of careful excavation, finally yielded. A low groan, almost a sigh, emanated from the pipe as Mr. Miller, his brow furrowed in concentration, applied a steady, firm pressure. The rusty metal, once immovably entrenched, gave a fraction of an inch, then another. Lily, perched on her knees beside him, held her own breath, her eyes wide with a mixture of hope and apprehension. Mrs. Miller, ever practical, had placed a thick old blanket on the grass nearby, a soft landing spot for whatever might emerge. Buster, his earlier frantic energy now distilled into a potent, silent vigil, nudged Mr. Miller's elbow with his wet nose, a soft whine escaping his throat. It was less a demand and more an urgent plea, a wordless affirmation of faith. He then settled back down, his golden gaze fixed on the pipe, his tail a slow, rhythmic thump against the damp soil, like a metronome counting down to freedom. "It's moving," Mr. Miller murmured, his voice tight with effort and anticipation. He braced his feet, his muscles tensing. The trowel lay abandoned beside the ever-deepening trench, replaced now by the brute force of his hands. He twisted gently, testing the pipe's resistance. The metallic groan intensified, a rusty protest against its impending liberation. Small clods of earth, clinging stubbornly to its rough surface, flaked away, revealing patches of tarnished silver where the rust had not fully taken hold. Lily leaned closer, her small hands clasped together. She imagined the tiny creature inside, perhaps huddled in a ball, cold and scared, its world a dark, echoing cylinder. The thought spurred her to whisper encouragement, a soft, high-pitched, "You can do it, Mr. Miller," that was more for the unseen kitten than for her father. He grunted in response, ignoring the growing ache in his shoulders. "Almost there, Sweet Pea, just a little more." With a final, sustained pull, a sound like a wet suction breaking free filled the air. The pipe, with a surprising pop, detached itself from the earth. Mr. Miller stumbled back a step, holding the length of metal carefully, like a precious, fragile artifact. Dust, disturbed from its long slumber, plumed around the opening. The world seemed to hold its breath. Buster rose to his feet, ears pricked, his entire body quivering with barely contained excitement. His tail thumped faster now, a furious blur against the green. Mr. Miller carefully turned the pipe, angling the open end downwards over the soft blanket. He peered into the darkness, a flicker of concern crossing his face. It's still in there," he whispered, his voice tinged with a fresh wave of anxiety. He gently tapped the side of the pipe, a light, rhythmic pat. Nothing. Lily's heart sank. Had all their efforts been for naught? Was the kitten too weak to move? Then, a faint, almost imperceptible shift. A small, dusty paw, no bigger than her thumb, appeared at the edge of the pipe's opening. It twitched, then withdrew. "It's moving!" Lily cried, a gasp of pure relief escaping her lips. Mr. Miller exhaled slowly. A long-held breath finally released. He tilted the pipe further, his movements painstakingly slow and deliberate. Buster nudged his hand again, a soft whimper of encouragement. And then, with a delicate slide, a tiny, dust-covered bundle of fur tumbled onto the blanket. It was barely larger than Mr. Miller's palm, its small body shuddering with silent sobs. Its eyes, still sealed shut, were caked with dirt. It was so small, so utterly vulnerable, that it seemed almost a miracle it had survived. A collective gasp rippled through the small group. Lily knelt instantly, her earlier timidity forgotten, her hand reaching out but pausing just short of touching the fragile creature. Mrs. Miller quickly produced a small, clean cloth from her pocket, her eyes welling up. Buster, with an almost reverent gentleness, approached the blanket. He lowered his massive head, his nose twitching, taking in the scent of the tiny, helpless being. He let out a soft, low whine, a sound of profound relief and tenderness, then nudged the kitten softly with his wet nose. It was a touch so light, so cautious, that it spoke volumes of his understanding of its fragility. The kitten, though still unseeing and disoriented, instinctively curled into the warmth of Buster's golden fur, as if recognizing the source of its salvation. The setting sun, now lower in the sky, cast long golden shadows across the scene, illuminating the triumphant glow on the family's faces and the dusty, yet utterly precious, new addition to their world. A lick and a purr. The collective gasp that escaped the Miller family was quickly followed by a symphony of gentle murmurs. The small, dust-caked creature, no bigger than Mr. Miller's palm, lay curled and trembling in the hollow of his hand. It was undeniably a kitten, its tiny pointed ears pressed flat against its head, its eyes still sealed shut, a testament to its extreme youth and terror. Buster, who had been a whirlwind of frantic energy moments before, now stood perfectly still, his large golden head lowered, his soft brown eyes fixed on the kitten. A low, rumbling whine vibrated in his chest, a sound of profound relief mixed with an almost unbearable tenderness. Before anyone could react, he nudged his wet nose against Mr. Miller's hand, then, with exquisite gentleness, extended his tongue and delivered a slow, deliberate lick to the kitten's tiny, dusty head. It was a gesture of immediate, unconditional comfort, a silent promise of protection. Lily, her heart a fragile bird fluttering in her ribs, watched with wide, tear-filled eyes. She took a hesitant step forward, her hand outstretched. Is it okay, Daddy?" Her voice was a bare whisper, barely audible above the rhythmic thud of her own pulse. Mr. P. Just very scared, and probably a P. Just very scared, and probably a little cold. He carefully shifted the kitten into a more stable position in his palm, then looked at Mrs. Miller. "We need to get it warm and maybe some milk if it's old enough." Mrs. Miller, ever practical, was already moving towards the house. "I'll get a towel and some warm water. Lily, can you grab the old heating pad from the linen closet?" But Lily wasn't ready to move. Her gaze was still locked on the tiny ball of fur, so vulnerable, so completely dependent. Buster, sensing her profound empathy, nudged her leg with his nose, then looked back at the kitten, as if encouraging her to approach. Taking a deep breath, Lily extended her hand again, this time reaching for the kitten. Can I hold it?" she asked, her voice still thin but laced with a hopeful eagerness. Mr. Miller hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Be very, very gentle, Sweet Pea. It's fragile. He carefully lowered his hand, presenting the kitten to her. Lily's fingers trembled slightly as she cupped her hands together, creating a warm, safe nest. The kitten, still unmoving, was transferred into her care. It felt impossibly light, a mere wisp of life, yet her hands, usually so small, felt enormous around it. The dust that coated its fur was surprisingly soft beneath her fingertips. She could feel the faint, rapid beat of its tiny heart against her palm, a fragile testament to its will to survive. Buster, his mission of rescue complete, positioned himself beside Lily, his head resting gently on her knee. He watched her, then the kitten, his eyes conveying a silent communication. You protect it now. Lily, mesmerized, gently stroked the kitten's head with the tip of her finger. The fur, though matted with earth, was surprisingly fine, leaned in closer, her breath barely stirring the tiny hairs on its face. "Hello, little one," she whispered, her voice a soothing balm. "You're safe now." As if in response to the warmth of her hands and the gentle cadence of her voice, a faint vibration started. It was barely perceptible at first, a tiny tremor against her skin. Then it grew, a soft, rhythmic thrumming. Lily's eyes widened in astonishment. It was a purr, a real, honest-to-goodness purr, emanating from that tiny, dust-covered body. It was weak, a little raspy, but undeniably there, a sound of pure, unadulterated contentment. A wave of pure joy washed over Lily. Her initial fear and anxiety melted away, replaced by a profound sense of wonder. This tiny creature, rescued from the clutches of darkness and despair, was already responding to kindness. The purr grew stronger, a tiny motor of happiness in her palm. It was a sound that transcended the dirt and the fear, a promise of life and comfort. Buster, his head still on her knee, let out a soft sigh, a sound of perfect satisfaction. The silent communication between dog and girl was complete. The tiny kitten, nestled in Lily's gentle hands, was finally home. Mrs. Miller returned with a soft, warm towel and a small bowl of milk. She knelt beside Lily, her own eyes softening at the sight of the purring kitten. "Well, I'll be," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "Looks like Buster found himself a little friend." She gently draped the towel around Lily's hands, encasing the kitten in a cocoon of warmth. The purr intensified, a tiny symphony of gratitude that filled the air and resonated deep within the hearts of the Miller family. Best friends forever. The days that followed the rescue were filled with a quiet joy, a soft hum that vibrated through the Miller household. Pip, as Lily had christened the tiny furball, was a whirlwind of playful energy, a stark contrast to the terrified creature they had pulled from the earth. And at the centre of Pip's universe, almost as if ordained, was Buster. Their bond wasn't just apparent, it was a living, breathing entity. In the sprawling, sun-dappled backyard, Buster would lie stretched out, a golden expanse of contentment, as Pip launched surprise attacks on his tail. The kitten, still so small that a single paw print could fit within the pad of Buster's, would pounce with all the ferocity of a miniature tiger, batting playfully at the feathery plume. Buster, in turn, would respond with an exaggerated groan, a deep, rumbling sound that seemed to vibrate through the grass, before slowly, deliberately, wagging his tail just enough to keep Pip engaged. Sometimes Buster would lower his head, allowing Pip to stalk across his broad snout, the kitten's tiny claws sheathed as it navigated the terrain of Buster's face. Lily, watching from the kitchen window, would often find herself smiling so hard her cheeks ached. It was a ballet of gentle giants and fearless sprites, a testament to the unexpected friendships that life sometimes offered. One afternoon, the air thick with the scent of freshly cut grass, Lily sat cross-legged on a picnic blanket, a book open on her lap, though her eyes rarely strayed from the duo. Buster was dozing, a soft snore escaping his nostrils, when Pip, having exhausted himself with a rigorous chase of a fallen leaf, decided Buster's side was the perfect place for a nap. The kitten kneaded its tiny paws into Buster's thick fur for a moment, a miniature massage, before curling into a perfect ginger and white comma against his warm flank. A soft purr, barely audible above the gentle rustle of leaves, emanated from Pip. Buster, without opening his eyes, let out a soft sigh, a sound of utter contentment, and shifted slightly, just enough to cradle Pip more securely. It was a silent acknowledgement, a mutual agreement of comfort and trust. Lily felt a warmth spread through her chest, a feeling akin to the sun on a cool day. She reached out and gently stroked Buster's head, his fur soft and familiar beneath her fingers. He leaned into her touch, his big head resting heavily on her knee, his breathing deep and even. It was a protective gesture, as if to say, "We are all safe here, together." Later that evening, after dinner, the Miller family gathered on the porch swing, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the lawn. Mr. and Mrs. Miller watched Buster and Pip, a shared sense of wonder on their faces. Pip, now awake and recharged, was attempting to scale Buster's back, a furry Everest. Buster, with remarkable patience, tolerated the ascent, occasionally letting out a low, playful growl when Pip got a little too adventurous near his ears. "I still can't believe it," Mrs. Miller murmured, her voice soft, almost reverent. "From that desperate digging to this." She gestured with a hand towards the unlikely pair. Mr. Miller nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face. "He knew, didn't he? From the very beginning." Lily, snuggled between her parents, looked at Buster, then at Pip, who was now batting playfully at Buster's dangling jowls. "He's always been special," she said, her voice filled with quiet pride. "But this is different." Indeed it was. Buster, the loyal family dog, had transcended his role. He wasn't just a pet. He was a hero, a guardian, a silent testament to the unspoken connections that sometimes bound creatures together. And Pip, the tiny kitten, a survivor against all odds, was the living embodiment of that heroism. A purring, playful reminder of Buster's unwavering loyalty. Their bond was a constant source of fascination and joy, a daily spectacle that filled the Miller home with an enduring sense of warmth and gratitude. It was clear to everyone as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, that Buster and Pip were more than just friends. They were, in the truest sense of the words, best friends forever.